Hello and welcome again to Casual Magic. Today I'm going to be going over my Kaladesh second half spoilers top 9. Why 9? Because honestly, this time I don't think there's 10. Here we go. Coming at number 9, Via Pashiri, Sage Lifecrafter. 1 green for a 1-2, that's pretty good. But the main thing about her is 4 and a green to tap to create an XX colorless token, where X is number of creatures you control. This is definitely good in a go-wide strategy where you're creating a bunch of Thopter tokens, Servo tokens, and so on to build up a board state and then start pumping out some reasonably beefy tokens. It's also something I'm kind of curious in EDH to see if she ends up in something like an Elf deck, which is also putting out tons of tokens. That's definitely worth looking at. For number 8, Whirl of Virtuoso. Now the interesting thing about this is I've seen some combos on it. So say for example at the bottom where it says pay 3 energy to create a Thopter token. If this goes with some other cards, for example a somewhat easy one just because it involves 1 card, if you have 3 of it, Decoction Module. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get an energy counter. So if you have 3 of these, 3 energy counters, goes back to Whirl of Virtuoso, create a Thopter, there you go, infinite combo, and you can create a Googleplex of Thopter tokens. So moving into 8th Revolt, I'm kind of curious what other cards will come along to support it. So I'm definitely hopeful for this card in the future. For number 7, Dovin. This is classic Azorius, white and blue, just slow the game down. It's +1 until the next turn. Up to 1 target creature gets -3/-0, and its activated abilities can't be activated. -1, you gain 2 life and draw a card. His ultimate probably never get the chance to go off, but it's going to just be back and forth trying to lock down a creature or turn off its activated abilities, which are awesome, and then on the next turn gaining life and drawing a card, and back and forth and back and forth, and it's just going to be annoying. Typical white and blue. For number 6, Authority of the Consuls. This is basically a tiny half version of Thalia Heretical Cathar. It's 1 white for an enchantment. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. You get a side perk, so that way you gain life when a creature comes in under your opponent's control. So for something like EDH, if you can get this out on the first turn, you're just basically gaining life as they build up their board state. But in a one-on-one environment, definitely this is going to be fun against a deck that goes heavy on creatures with haste. That way it completely counters that. So that way, until they're able to get rid of this enchantment, all of their creatures that they're just throwing out with haste, congratulations, they're all coming in tapped. So definitely going to be fun. For number 5, a very, very red card. Combustible Gearhulk, 4 of anything, 2 red for 6/6 with first strike. That in itself is good, but then the opponent has to make a decision. Do you draw 3 cards, or do you put those 3 cards into the graveyard, and then the opponent takes damage based on their converted mana cost? In true red fashion, it's a gamble. You don't know. You hope for 3 lands, that way you take 0 damage, but if you let them draw the 3 cards and they kind of work out to be huge mana cost, maybe it's lethal damage late game. You don't know. It's red. It's random. It's fun. So I'm definitely curious to see how this goes. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the most played card in the world, but it should be fun to play, especially in something like a draft. It'll just be very random. Win or lose, classic red. For number 4, Refurbish. 3 and a white for a sorcery. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. In an artifact-heavy set, getting artifacts just straight to the battlefield, fantastic. But in something like EDH, this is going to be so much fun. Especially for those occasional ones where you have, let's say for example, some way to cheat in Blightsteel Colossus, and you get it out, and you feel great, and oh, it's not resolving because someone countered it. Aww. Well, don't worry about it. Refurbish is just another one of those ways that for, in this case, 4 mana, or possibly less if you have other ways to make your spells cheaper, congratulations. Blightsteel is going to get a second chance to go on the battlefield. It's great. It's great. It's a good card, and at an uncommon cost, it's definitely going to see some play. It's not going to be in necessarily every deck, but I'm definitely kind of curious to see where it ends up. For number 3, Padim, Council of Innovation. He's a 1/4, so you can't get rid of him with something like a lightning bolt, so at least he's annoying enough to stick around. But the main thing about him, artifacts you control have hexproof. In an artifact heavy set, that is huge. And I'm definitely kind of curious, since he's a legendary creature, how some people are going to be using him as a commander in a blue artifact deck. It should be interesting, because I've seen some blue artifact decks that are pretty good before as far as EDH goes. So he should fit in as an interesting commander, especially once you throw down something like Hexproof and they just start putting out tokens after tokens of, Thopters or whatever else, and they have Hexproof. That's going to be challenging, to say the least. So I'm definitely thinking he's going to be a good card. For number 2, Fumigate. 3 and 2 white. It's not Armageddon. It's not Wrath of God. I guess the upside that you get is destroy all creatures, but then you gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. So it's a board wipe and you gain some life. That's the extra 1 mana, I guess. In something like EDH, I know people are probably going to be going for cheaper board wipes, but this is probably one that's going to get thrown in. That way you can just have an additional board wipe. The other nice thing about it is, in a limited environment, there are so few board wipes that this should be something that's included in several decks, especially for something like a draft. I mean, this is just first pickable, definitely. So it's definitely going to see a lot of play, and I'm pretty sure, as far as some of the Bant decks go, they're probably going to include this too, because it just kind of fits in with their strategy. And finally, number 1, it's probably not as good as Chandra was in last week's video, but it still should have some play. Metalwork Colossus. Now, it does have a converted mana cost of 11. However, it's not quite affinity text goes. Metalwork Colossus costs X less to cast, where X is the total converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts you control. Separately, you can sacrifice 2 artifacts to get it back in your hand. But the main thing about it is you're able to get it in more cheaply than it is written. And in a somewhat similar way to Emrakul the Promised End being brought in early for less than a 13 mana cost, I think this is going to work out similarly, where it's going to be coming in for less than 11 quite a bit, especially in an artifact heavy set where people can get non-creature artifacts out onto the battlefield. So if you think that you have a vehicle just lying around not doing anything, well, as long as there's not crew in it, that's a non-creature artifact just sitting out there. So if you have a vehicle that costs something like 5 or 6, let's say, for example, 5, then the next turn, 5 already counts to the casting cost of this. So then this suddenly can come out for 6. And because it's colorless, I think it's going to be used in basically any type of deck. So I think this is at least going to get tried out in a lot of different decks to start off. I don't know if it's necessarily going to win anything, because it would be a lot nicer if it had something like Trample or Flying to actually punch through with that 10/10 rather than just being blocked by some little chump blocker token. But it should be a very interesting card to see what happens. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. So those are my top 9 out of the second half. What do you think? Am I crazy? Were you mad that I left out vehicles again? Let me know in the comments. And if you can, like or subscribe. It'll help me try and guide my channel into the future to see what you want as more video content that hopefully will be not just a spoiler, because I plan on moving on to something else next week. So until next time, good luck.